Briley Carson, 28, never imagined her own mother would betray her so completely. After covering the family mortgage for 5 years, while her unemployed sister contributed nothing, Briley found herself homeless with just 48 hours' notice. But when she walked away with her name still on the mortgage, her mother and sister would soon learn that family loyalty cuts both ways, and karma doesn't forget addresses. Hey everyone! Before I dive into what might be the most painful family betrayal I've ever experienced, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you're new here, this is a story about family betrayal, and yes, the sweetest revenge that karma could deliver. Hit that subscribe button and like this video if you've ever had a family member who took advantage of your generosity. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how this all plays out. The mortgage payments began almost accidentally. 5 years ago, when I was just 23 and fresh out of college with my business degree, I moved back into my childhood home in suburban Pennsylvania. My mother, Diane Carson, had been struggling financially since my father passed away 3 years prior. The medical bills had drained their savings, and the mortgage on our modest 4-bedroom colonial was 3 months behind when I returned. "It's just temporary, Briley," my mother had assured me when I offered to help with that month's payment. "The insurance company is still processing Dad's policy. Once that comes through, we'll be back on track." That insurance money never materialized, or at least that's what I was told. The temporary arrangement morphed into a permanent situation. Each month, $1,850 transferred from my account to cover the mortgage payment. I didn't mind at first. After landing a solid entry-level marketing position at a Philadelphia firm, I was making enough to cover the mortgage while still saving a little. Plus, living at home allowed me to avoid rental costs in the city, though my hour-long commute each way was draining. My sister Mackenzie, 3 years my senior at 31, had been living at home even before I returned. After dropping out of college in her junior year, she'd bounced between retail jobs, never holding one for more than a few months. She contributed nothing to household expenses, claiming various mental health issues prevented her from maintaining steady employment. My mother coddled her, making excuses for why Mackenzie couldn't possibly be expected to shoulder any financial responsibility. "Your sister is going through a difficult time," Mom would say, whenever I suggested Mackenzie could at least contribute to groceries or utilities. "She needs support, not pressure." I watched as Mackenzie spent her days sleeping until noon, binge-watching reality shows, and occasionally picking up shift work just long enough to fund shopping sprees or weekend trips with friends. Meanwhile, I worked overtime to ensure our family home remained ours. The dynamic created an unspoken tension that permeated our household like a toxic fog. My relationship with my sister had always been complicated. Growing up, Mackenzie had been my father's favorite something neither of them tried to hide. She was the athletic one, the pretty one, the social butterfly, who brought home friends and boyfriends while I stayed in my room with books and later coding projects. When Dad got sick, it was me who sat with him through chemotherapy appointments, while Mackenzie found excuses to be elsewhere. Yet somehow in Mom's narrative, it was Mackenzie who needed the most support after his death. By my 3rd year of paying the mortgage, I'd received 2 promotions and was considering buying my own place. The real estate market in our area was heating up, and I had managed to save nearly $30,000 for a down payment despite carrying my family's financial burden. When I broached the subject with my mother over Sunday coffee, her reaction caught me off guard. "You can't possibly leave now," she said, her voice tinged with panic. "Mackenzie is finally starting therapy, and your moving out would devastate her progress. Besides, who would cover the mortgage?" The guilt trip worked. I stayed, continuing to pay, while watching my own life possibilities narrow. I dated occasionally, but serious relationships faltered when potential partners realized my financial commitments. My friends bought homes, traveled internationally, and built investment portfolios, while I remained tethered to my childhood address by a combination of obligation and manipulation. Then came the pandemic. Like many, I transitioned to working from home, which meant being in the house with Mackenzie and my mother all day, every day. The close quarters magnified our dysfunctional family dynamic. Mackenzie complained about my work calls disturbing her sleep. Mom mediated by suggesting I work from my car or the local coffee shop to keep the peace. The final straw came when I discovered my mother had been helping Mackenzie finance a series of wellness retreats, using money I thought was going toward household expenses. Over the course of 2 years, they had spent nearly $15,000 on luxury spa weekends and holistic healing programs, all while I believed we were barely making ends meet. When confronted, my mother was defensive. Mackenzie needs these retreats for her mental health. You wouldn't understand because you've always been so practical. She said practical like it was a character flaw. That night I sat alone in my room scrolling through apartment listings and calculating how much longer I would need to support a household that clearly didn't value my sacrifices. I was tired, bone tired of being the responsible one, the reliable one. The one who could always be counted on to pick up the slack while receiving nothing but criticism in return. Little did I know that my decision would soon be made for me, and in the most devastating way possible. The family I had sacrificed so much for was about to show me exactly where I stood in their priorities, and it wasn't anywhere near the top. As winter turned to spring, I noticed subtle changes in my mother and sister's behavior. They had more private conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Mackenzie seemed almost cheerful, which was unusual given her perpetual state of claimed depression. My mother began asking more questions about my work schedule and future plans. At the time, I attributed it to normal family curiosity, maybe even hope that I might finally be planning my own life. I was partially right, they were indeed planning for the future. Just not one that included me. The betrayal came on a rainy Tuesday in April. I had just wrapped up a video call with my team about an upcoming product launch when my mother knocked on my bedroom door. Her expression was a strange mix of determination and discomfort. "Briley, we need to talk," she said, perching awkwardly on the edge of my bed. "There are going to be some changes around here." My first thought was that she'd finally decided to make Mackenzie contribute financially. Maybe the years of my gentle prodding had finally broken through. I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention, completely unprepared for what came next. "Your sister is going through a difficult time," my mother began, using the phrase I'd heard countless times before. "Her therapist thinks she needs a more supportive environment to heal properly. She needs a space of her own to really focus on her recovery." "Okay," I said slowly, trying to follow where this was heading. "Is she moving out? Because I can help her look for affordable apartments." "If no, Briley," my mother interrupted, her voice firmer now. "Mackenzie needs this house. This is her childhood home where she feels safe. She needs the stability of familiar surroundings." I stared at her, uncomprehending at first. Then the implication hit me like a physical blow. "You're asking me to move out," I clarified, certain I must be misunderstanding. "Not asking, dear. Telling." My mother's eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Mackenzie needs your room specifically. The morning light is better for her meditation practice, and the space is larger. We've discussed it at length with her therapist, and this is the best solution." "When exactly did you plan this?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "We've been considering it for a while. Mackenzie's therapist suggested it might be good for everyone. You're always talking about getting your own place anyway, and you're certainly financially stable enough." She said this last part without a hint of irony, apparently forgetting why I hadn't been able to afford my own place. "And the mortgage?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it spoken aloud. "Well, you're on the deed as a co-owner now, remember? when we refinanced last year, so you'll need to continue making those payments, of course. She said this as if it were the most reasonable arrangement in the world that I should pay for a house I would no longer be living in. The refinancing had been my mother's idea. The interest rates had dropped significantly, and putting my name on the deed alongside hers had seemed like a smart move at the time. It protected my investment in the property and gave me a sense of security. Now I realized it had been a trap, binding me legally to payments while they planned to force me out. "How long have you been planning this?" My voice was barely above a whisper. "That's not important, Briley. What matters is that your sister needs this support right now. You've always been the strong one, the independent one. You'll be fine." My independence once again being used against me. "When do you expect me to leave?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Well, Mackenzie's retreat ends this weekend, so ideally by Friday. That gives you 3 days, which should be plenty of time to pack your essentials and find a temporary arrangement while you look for something permanent." 3 days. After 5 years of paying the mortgage and supporting our family, I was being given 3 days to find a new place to live in one of the most competitive housing markets in the country. As if sensing my shock, my mother patted my hand in what I suppose she thought was a comforting gesture. "This is for the best, dear. Mackenzie needs this chance to heal, and you need to start living your own life. You've been so focused on taking care of us that you've put your own life on hold. Consider this a push in the right direction." I sat in stunned silence as she rose and headed for the door. Before leaving, she turned back with one final twist of the knife. "Oh, and don't mention the financial arrangements to Mackenzie. She's very sensitive about money issues and it might trigger her anxiety to know you're still paying the mortgage. We'll tell her you're gifting us your portion of the house as a way of supporting her recovery." With that, she closed the door, leaving me alone with the shattered remains of what I'd thought was family loyalty. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and began researching. I looked up mortgage law, co-ownership responsibilities, and the implications of my name being on both the deed and the mortgage. As the night deepened, a plan began to form, one born of necessity and fueled by a newfound understanding that the people who should have loved me most had instead seen me as nothing more than a financial resource to be exploited. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. I took an emergency personal day from work and met with a real estate attorney first thing Wednesday morning. The consultation fee of $350 wiped out my restaurant budget for the month, but the information I received was worth every penny. "Yes, you're legally responsible for the mortgage, since your name is on the loan," the attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Vivian Torres, confirmed. "But being on the deed also gives you certain rights that your mother and sister can't override." I explained my situation, watching as her professional expression shifted from neutral to concerned to barely concealed outrage. "Let me get this straight," she said, leaning forward across her desk. "You've been paying the entire mortgage for 5 years, you're a co-owner of the property, and now they're forcing you to move out while expecting you to continue making payments." When she put it like that, the absurdity of the situation was even more apparent. I nodded, throat tight. "That's not just morally questionable, it's potentially actionable," she said. "But litigation would be expensive and time-consuming. If your goal is to cleanly extract yourself from this situation, I have some alternative suggestions." Those suggestions formed the backbone of my plan. I spent the rest of Wednesday securing a small studio apartment in the city closer to my office. The rent was steep, $1,700 per month, for barely 500 square feet. But it was available immediately, a minor miracle in Philadelphia's rental market. The security deposit and first month's rent depleted most of my savings, but I signed the lease without hesitation. Thursday was dedicated to packing and making arrangements. I rented a small storage unit for the furniture and belongings that wouldn't fit in my new place. I contacted utility companies and arranged for services to be transferred solely to my mother's name. I changed my address with the post office, my bank, and everywhere else that mattered. Throughout these frantic preparations, my mother maintained an air of forced cheerfulness, as if we were simply witnessing my exciting next chapter, rather than an eviction from my own home. She offered occasional help, a box here, packing tape there, while making comments about how this is really for the best, and Mackenzie will finally have the space she needs to heal. I responded with non-committal hums and nods, giving nothing away about my true thoughts or plans. The less they knew, the better. By Friday morning, my car and a small rented moving truck were packed with my belongings. My mother stood in the driveway, maintaining the pretense that this was a normal, mutually agreed-upon departure. "You'll come for Sunday dinner next week, won't you?" she asked as I closed the trunk. "Mackenzie would love to show you how she's setting up her new meditation space." Her new meditation space. My former bedroom. "We'll see," I replied neutrally. "I'll be pretty busy settling in." "Don't forget about the mortgage payment on the 1st, she reminded me, dropping all pretense of maternal concern. "The bank sends those nasty late notices if it's even a day late." I looked at her, really looked at her for perhaps the first time in years. This woman who had raised me, who had once bandaged my scraped knees and checked for monsters under my bed, was now casually reminding me to pay for a home she had just expelled me from. In that moment I saw not my mother but a stranger who had calculated my value and found it to be purely financial. "I won't forget my responsibilities," I said carefully. "You can count on that." Something in my tone must have alerted her because she gave me a sharp look. "Briley, I know you're upset, but this really is for the best." "Mackenzie needs—" "I know what Mackenzie needs," I interrupted, surprised by my own calm. "You've made that abundantly clear for the past 5 years. I'm very clear on exactly where I stand in this family's hierarchy of needs." She had the grace to look momentarily discomforted before rallying. "You've always been so independent, so capable. Mackenzie isn't like you. She needs more support." "Yes, she does," I agreed, sliding into the driver's seat. "And apparently that support includes my bedroom, my financial contributions, and my indefinite absence." Message received loud and clear. I pulled out of the driveway without looking back, the moving truck following behind me. In my rearview mirror, I could see my mother standing with her arms crossed, a small frown creasing her forehead, as if she were trying to decode a puzzle. She had no idea what was coming, and for the first time in years I felt a flicker of something that wasn't exhaustion or resentment. It felt suspiciously like freedom. My new studio apartment was everything my childhood home wasn't: small, impersonal, and entirely mine. The building was an older conversion in Center City, with exposed brick walls and large windows that looked out onto a narrow city street. After the moving truck left, I spent that first night on a bare mattress, surrounded by boxes and the hollow echo of empty space. I should have been devastated. I had just been betrayed by my family, lost my home, and depleted my savings. By all rights, I should have been curled up in a ball of misery. Instead, I felt an unexpected lightness. For the first time in 5 years, I was responsible only for myself. The crushing weight of supporting people who didn't appreciate me had lifted, leaving me breathless with possibility. Saturday morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I hadn't yet found curtains for. After a quick shower in my tiny bathroom, I sat cross-legged on my mattress with a cup of instant coffee and my laptop. It was time to execute the next phase of my plan. First, I called my bank and spoke with a mortgage specialist. I explained that I was a co-owner and co-borrower on a mortgage, but no longer resided at the property. I wanted to understand my options. "This is actually quite common in divorce situations," the specialist Nathan explained, "though it's less common between family members who aren't spouses." I listened carefully as he outlined my responsibilities and rights. as I suspected being on both the deed and the mortgage put me in a complicated position. I couldn't simply walk away from the financial obligation, but I did have leverage. Your best option would be to either sell the property and split the proceeds, or have the remaining occupant refinance in their name only, Nathan advised. That would legally release you from the obligation. And if neither of those options is agreeable to the other party, I asked. Then you're in a stalemate situation. You remain legally responsible for the debt, but you also retain ownership rights to the property. He paused. I strongly recommend getting legal counsel if you anticipate resistance. I already had. Attorney Torres had mapped out several scenarios during our consultation, ranging from best case to worst case. What I was planning fell somewhere in the middle. After thanking Nathan for his time, I made my next move. I logged into my bank account and set up an automatic transfer for $925, exactly half of the monthly mortgage payment, to go into a separate savings account I had opened specifically for this purpose. Then I drafted an email to my mother. Dear Mom, I'm writing to formally notify you of changes to our financial arrangement regarding the house. As co-owner and co-borrower on the mortgage, I am legally responsible for half of the monthly payment, which comes to $925. I will continue to fulfill this legal obligation while we determine next steps regarding the property. Since I no longer reside at the property and receive no benefit from it, I will not be continuing to pay the full mortgage amount. As you and Mackenzie are the sole occupants benefiting from the property, it is reasonable that you cover the remaining half of the payment. I've consulted with both legal and financial advisors who confirm this arrangement is fair and legally sound. My portion of the payment has been set up as an automatic transfer to a dedicated account from which I will make payments directly to the mortgage company for my half. Going forward, I suggest we consider either selling the property and dividing the proceeds, or you refinancing to remove my name from both the deed and mortgage. I'm open to discussing these options when you're ready. Regards, Briley. I read the email 3 times before hitting send. It was formal, factual, and gave no indication of the anger and hurt swirling beneath my carefully chosen words. My mother would be receiving it, just as Mackenzie was returning from her retreat, ready to move into her newly acquired bedroom. Perfect timing. With that task complete, I turned my attention to building my new life. I spent the rest of the weekend unpacking, organizing, and transforming the empty studio into something resembling a home. I bought a few houseplants, hung artwork I'd kept in storage at my parents' house, and splurged on new bedding that hadn't been chosen to match anyone else's decor preferences. Small acts of independence that felt revolutionary after years of compromise. On Sunday evening, my phone exploded with notifications. 3 missed calls from my mother, 2 from Mackenzie, and a series of increasingly frantic texts demanding that I call immediately about my ridiculous email. I silenced my phone and continued assembling a small bookshelf I'd purchased from a nearby thrift store. The hammering helped drown out the voice in my head that still whispered I should feel guilty. That voice had controlled me for too long, convincing me that my needs were less important than my sister's, that my sacrifices were expected, while hers were impossible. I drove another nail with particular force, imagining it securing not just the bookshelf but my newfound resolve. Monday morning brought an email response from my mother. It was everything I expected: outrage, guilt-tripping, and thinly veiled threats. Briley, I cannot believe you would do this to your own family. After everything we've been through together, this feels like a deliberate attempt to hurt your sister when she's finally making progress. The mortgage has always been your responsibility. We agreed to this arrangement years ago when you moved back home. Mackenzie is devastated. She was so looking forward to having you support her recovery, and now she feels abandoned all over again. Her therapist is concerned this setback could undo months of progress. I don't know what kind of advisors you've been talking to, but our family affairs are private and should remain that way. If you're having financial difficulties, you should have discussed them with me directly, instead of making these unilateral decisions. I expect the full mortgage payment by the first of the month as always. We can discuss any changes to our arrangement after Mackenzie has had time to adjust to her new environment. Mom, no mention of my suggestion to sell or refinance. No acknowledgement of the fundamental unfairness of the situation. Just more of the same manipulation that had kept me financially shackled for years. I forwarded the email to Attorney Torres with a brief note proceeding as discussed. Then I blocked both my mother's and sister's numbers on my phone. The temporary peace this would bring was necessary for the next phase of my plan. I needed clarity and focus, not the emotional turmoil their constant communications would create. That evening, as I sat by my window watching city life unfold below, I felt a strange mix of sadness and determination. The family I had known or thought I had known was effectively gone. In its place was a clear-eyed understanding of who we really were to each other, my mother the enabler, Mackenzie the eternal victim, and me, the designated provider whose worth extended only as far as my financial contributions. It was a painful revelation but also a liberating one. For years I had been pouring energy and resources into a bottomless pit of need, never questioning whether I deserved better treatment. Now, with distance and perspective, I could see the dynamic for what it was, exploitative and unhealthy. As the first of the month approached, I steeled myself for the confrontation that was sure to come. My mother would soon discover exactly what it meant to have me pay my share and nothing more. The mortgage statement would arrive showing my half paid and the other half outstanding. The real test would begin. Hey everyone, can you believe what's happening in this story so far? I'd love to know if you've ever had to make a tough decision to prioritize your own well-being over family expectations. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this family drama rollercoaster, hit that like button to help others find this story too. Now let's see what happens when my mother realizes I'm serious about only paying half the mortgage. The 1st of May arrived with predictable drama. At 9:17 a.m. while I was presenting marketing analytics to my team, my email pinged with an urgent message from my mother. The mortgage statement shows only half paid. This is unacceptable. Call me immediately. I muted the notification and continued my presentation, earning praise from my director for a particularly insightful analysis of consumer behavior patterns. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had finally gained professional recognition now that I wasn't exhausting myself supporting my family. By lunchtime, the emails had escalated to voice messages left on my work phone, which I hadn't thought to block. I listened to them in the privacy of a conference room, my mother's voice progressively rising from concerned to frantic to outright furious. Briley, the mortgage company, called. They're saying the payment is incomplete. You need to fix this right away. This is completely irresponsible. Your sister is having anxiety attacks over this. You know how she gets when there are financial problems. If you don't make the full payment by the end of the day, I'm going to have to tell your aunts and uncles about how you're treating us. Is that what you want? For everyone to know you've abandoned your family. The last message left at 11:43 a.m. was simply, the mortgage is going to be reported late. This will affect your credit score too, you know. Is this childish revenge really worth damaging your financial future? That was the only message that gave me pause. She was right about one thing: a late payment would affect my credit score as well as hers. But according to Attorney Torres, as long as I could document that I had paid my agreed-upon half consistently, the long-term impact would be minimal. And more importantly, it would create the pressure needed to force a resolution. I didn't return any of the calls. Instead, I sent a brief email reiterating my position. I have paid my half of the mortgage as stated. Your half remains your responsibility. I'm still open to discussing selling the property or refinancing to remove my name. Then I returned to my work, throwing myself into projects with an energy I hadn't felt in years. My team noticed the difference, with one colleague commenting, "Whatever changes you've made in your life recently, they're working for you." She had no idea. The next 2 weeks followed a predictable pattern. Daily communications from my mother alternated between rage, guilt, and occasional attempts at reconciliation, though notably, these olive branches never included addressing the fundamental issue of the mortgage. Mackenzie joined the fray with tearful voicemails about how my abandonment was triggering her abandonment issues. I maintained my position through it all, responding only with variations of the same message: "I've paid my half. The rest is your responsibility. Let's discuss permanent solutions." By the 3rd week of May, the first late fee had been applied to the mortgage account. I received a formal notice from the bank, as did my mother. That evening my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Briley Carson," a male voice asked when I answered. "Speaking. This is Uncle Robert. Your mother asked me to talk some sense into you." Uncle Robert wasn't actually my uncle, but my father's closest friend, a semi-retired accountant who had always been kind to me growing up. I hadn't spoken to him since my father's funeral. "Hello, Uncle Robert," I said cautiously. "I'm guessing Mom didn't give you the full story. She said you've refused to pay the mortgage and now the bank is sending late notices. That doesn't sound like you, Briley. Your father would be disappointed." The invocation of my father stung, but I had anticipated this tactic. "Did she mention that I've been paying the entire mortgage for 5 years, while she and Mackenzie contributed nothing, or that they kicked me out of the house but expect me to continue paying for them to live there?" A long silence followed. "No," he finally said, "she didn't mention those details." I laid out the entire situation, keeping my tone factual and unemotional. Uncle Robert listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of surprise or dismay. "I see," he said when I finished. "That's not at all what Diane described. She made it sound like you'd had a minor disagreement and were punishing them financially out of spite." "It wasn't minor to me," I replied. "And I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply refusing to continue being exploited." "What are you hoping to achieve with this approach?" he asked, his tone now curious rather than accusatory. "Ideally, they'll refinance the mortgage to remove my name. Or, we'll agree to sell the house and split the proceeds according to our contributions. I've documented every payment I've made over the past 5 years." Another long pause. "Your father always said you had a good head for business. He'd be proud of how you're handling this, standing up for yourself while remaining rational." He cleared his throat. "I'll have a talk with your mother. Not promising anything will change, but at least she'll know I've heard your side." After we hung up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Being seen and heard by someone who had known my father, who could affirm that I wasn't being unreasonable, it mattered more than I had expected. The next day my mother sent a terse email. "Robert says you've been paying the entire mortgage for years. Is this true? Why didn't you tell me?" The willful ignorance in her question was breathtaking. I had mentioned my financial contributions countless times, only to be dismissed or told Mackenzie's needs were more important. Rather than engage with this obvious attempt to rewrite history, I replied simply, "Yes, it's true. I have bank records documenting every payment for the past 5 years. As I've said repeatedly, I'm willing to discuss selling the property or refinancing to remove my name from the mortgage." 2 days later, I received another email from my mother. The tone had shifted dramatically. "Briley, after discussing the situation with Robert and our family attorney, I understand we need to find a more equitable solution. The attorney has advised that our current arrangement is legally problematic. I'm willing to discuss refinancing the mortgage to remove your name, but Mackenzie and I can't afford the payments on our own. We need to find a compromise. Can we meet to discuss options, Mom?" Progress finally. But I wasn't naive enough to think this would be simple. My mother's acknowledgement came not from recognition of the unfairness of her actions, but from external pressure and legal advice. She was still looking for a compromise that would likely involve me continuing to subsidize them in some way. I agreed to meet, but with conditions. I'll meet, but only with Uncle Robert present as a neutral third party, and only after you've consulted with a mortgage broker about refinancing options. Please bring documentation of any income or assets you and Mackenzie can contribute toward the mortgage going forward. Setting these boundaries felt foreign but necessary. For too long, I had allowed my mother to control the narrative and set the terms of our relationship. Now I was reclaiming that power calmly, rationally, but firmly. The meeting was scheduled for the following weekend. As the date approached, I prepared meticulously, gathering financial records and consulting again with Attorney Torres. Whatever happened next would determine not just the fate of the house but the future of my relationship with my family. We met at a coffee shop equidistant between my apartment and my mother's my house. Neutral territory seemed appropriate for what promised to be a difficult conversation. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered some privacy while still being in a public space. The strategy was deliberate. My mother was less likely to create a scene in public. Uncle Robert arrived next, looking uncomfortable but determined in his role as mediator. He greeted me with a brief hug. "You look well, Briley," he said, studying my face. "There's something different about you." "Freedom," I replied, with a small smile. "It agrees with me." My mother and Mackenzie arrived together 5 minutes late, a power move my mother had employed throughout my life. Mackenzie looked sullen, her eyes deliberately not meeting mine as they approached the table. My mother, by contrast, had adopted her martyr expression, the one that communicated to everyone in visual range that she was suffering nobly through an ordeal. "Briley," she greeted me stiffly before turning to Uncle Robert with a warmer smile. "Robert, thank you for arranging this. It's so difficult when family members refuse to communicate directly." The passive aggression was vintage Diane Carson. I had expected it, had prepared for it, and found myself strangely unmoved by it. "Did you bring the refinancing options I asked about?" I responded deliberately, ignoring her attempt to cast me as the difficult one. Her smile faltered slightly. "We should order first, don't you think? It's rude to start business before everyone's settled." Another delay tactic. I recognized it but acquiesced, not wanting to appear unreasonable in front of Uncle Robert. We ordered tea for my mother, hot chocolate for Mackenzie, black coffee for Robert and myself, and waited in uncomfortable silence until the beverages arrived. Once the server had departed, I took control of the conversation. "I appreciate everyone meeting today. My goal is simple: to find a solution that legally separates me from the mortgage while being fair to everyone involved." "Fair?" Mackenzie spoke for the first time, her voice sharp. "Is it fair that you just abandoned us without warning? Do you know how stressful this has been for me? My therapist says my anxiety levels are off the charts because of your selfish behavior." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not the perpetual victim she portrayed, but a grown woman who had learned to weaponize her emotions to avoid adult responsibility. The realization was surprisingly liberating. "I didn't abandon anyone, Mackenzie. I was kicked out of my home with 48 hours notice after paying the entire mortgage for 5 years. I'm simply asking to be released from financial responsibility for a home I'm not allowed to live in." My voice remained calm, factual. "That's not," my mother began, but Uncle Robert interrupted. "Diane, did you bring the refinancing information?" Briley requested. My mother's mouth tightened. "The bank says we don't qualify for refinancing without Briley as a cosigner. Our combined income isn't sufficient." "What is your combined income?" I asked. "And what about assets? Do either of you have savings that could be put toward a down payment on a refinance?" My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Mackenzie's income is variable because of her health issues, and my part-time work at the library doesn't bring in much." "That's not what I asked," I pressed. "I asked for specific numbers." Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Briley has a right to know the financial situation if she's being asked to remain involved in any way." After more prodding, the truth emerged. My mother's part-time library job paid $24,000 annually. Mackenzie hadn't held a job in over 8 months, though she occasionally sold handmade jewelry online, bringing in perhaps $500 in a good month. Neither had any significant savings, a fact that shouldn't have surprised me but somehow still did. So you're asking me to remain legally responsible for a mortgage you have no way of paying, I summarized. That's not a solution. It's a continuation of the same exploitation. We're family, my mother said, as if that explained and excused everything. Families support each other through difficult times. Yes, they do, I agreed. But support should be mutual and acknowledged, not one-sided and taken for granted. I've been supporting this family financially for 5 years with no end in sight. When I needed support, even just a roof over my head, I was shown the door. Mackenzie rolled her eyes. You always make everything about you. You have a good job. You can afford an apartment. I can't. Why can't you? I asked, genuinely curious. You're 31 years old. What's prevented you from building a career or saving money? My mental health issues, which you've received extensive therapy for, including those luxury retreats I apparently helped finance. I turned to my mother. You told me we were barely making ends meet, but you were spending thousands on Mackenzie's wellness while I covered all the essential expenses. My mother had the grace to look embarrassed. Those retreats were medically necessary. Her therapist recommended them. And now that therapist is recommending my bedroom as necessary for her recovery, I noted. Convenient how Mackenzie's needs always seem to require sacrifices from me specifically. Uncle Robert, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. I think we need to focus on practical solutions. From what I'm hearing, refinancing isn't viable because neither Diane nor Mackenzie qualifies for a mortgage on their own. Is that correct? My mother nodded reluctantly. Then it seems to me there are 2 options, he continued. Either sell the house and divide the proceeds, or find a way for Briley to be fairly compensated for her continued financial involvement. We can't sell, Mackenzie protested immediately. This is our family home. Mom needs stability at her age, and I need a familiar environment for my recovery. I resisted the urge to point out that my needs had never been given similar consideration. Instead, I focused on the second option. If I'm to remain on the mortgage, I want formal recognition of my ownership interest proportional to my contributions, I said. By my calculations, I've paid approximately $111,000 toward the mortgage over 5 years. That represents about 30% of the current market value of the house. My mother looked stricken. But it would mean acknowledging reality, I finished for her. I've invested substantially in a property I'm now forbidden to live in. If you want me to continue that investment, I need legal protection. The conversation continued in circles for nearly 2 hours. My mother and Mackenzie cycled through various emotional appeals and alternative suggestions, all of which boiled down to one essential proposition: I should continue paying while receiving nothing in return. Finally, Uncle Robert stepped in with a compromise. Here's what I propose, he said. Briley continues paying half the mortgage for 6 months, while Diane and Mackenzie either secure employment that would qualify them for refinancing or prepare the house for sale. During this period, they pay the other half of the mortgage without fail. If after 6 months they still cannot refinance, the house goes on the market with proceeds divided based on documented contributions. It wasn't perfect, but it was reasonable. I agreed with one addition: everything needs to be in writing, legally binding with consequences specified if any party fails to meet their obligations. My mother and Mackenzie exchanged glances, clearly unhappy but out of options. With Uncle Robert's gentle but firm pressure, they eventually agreed to the terms. As we prepared to leave, Mackenzie made one last attempt to manipulate the situation. I suppose I could look for a roommate to help with expenses, she said, her tone suggesting immense sacrifice. though sharing my space would be extremely challenging for my anxiety. That's a good idea, I replied neutrally, ignoring the bait. Many adults have roommates to make housing more affordable. My mother shot me a reproachful look but said nothing. As Uncle Robert walked me to my car, he spoke quietly. Your father would be proud of how you handled this. You stood your ground without becoming cruel or vindictive. Thank you, I said, surprising myself with the thickness in my voice. That means a lot. I'll help them through this transition, he promised. But you've done more than your share already. It's time they learn to stand on their own. As I drove away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, lingering sadness, but most of all, hope for a future no longer defined by one-sided obligation. The 6-month probationary period revealed truths about my family that were both surprising and entirely predictable. After our meeting, the agreement was formalized through Attorney Torres. Each party had clear responsibilities. I would pay half the mortgage for 6 months. My mother and Mackenzie would pay the other half while actively pursuing financial independence. The first month went relatively smoothly. My half of the payment was automatically deposited as usual. My mother and Mackenzie scraped together their portion, delivering it a day late, but without triggering any penalties. I maintained my distance, communicating only through email about mortgage-related matters. By the second month, cracks began to appear. My mother emailed me 3 days before the payment was due. Riley Mackenzie has had a setback with her anxiety and had to leave her new job at the bookstore. We're going to be $300 short this month. Can you cover it just this once? We'll make it up next month. Mom, I responded, with a simple reminder of our agreement and the consequences of non-compliance. The full payment was made on time, though I later learned from Uncle Robert that my mother had borrowed the shortfall from him. The third month brought more excuses, each one feeling like a test of my resolve. Mackenzie had apparently developed new symptoms that prevented regular employment. My mother's hours at the library had been temporarily reduced. The house needed urgent repairs that took priority over the mortgage. Each time I maintained my position, our agreement was clear, and I would not deviate from it. Uncle Robert continued to serve as an intermediary, often providing behind-the-scenes financial support that my mother and Mackenzie didn't know I knew about. They need to learn, he told me, during one of our occasional coffee meetings. Your father enabled your mother's financial irresponsibility for years, and then you took over that role. Breaking the pattern is painful, but necessary. By the 4th month, something unexpected happened. Mackenzie got a job, a real one, with benefits at a local art supply store. Her lifelong interest in crafting apparently translated well to retail sales in that specific environment. My mother increased her hours at the library and took on additional work, cataloging a private collection for a wealthy local family. Their portion of the mortgage payment arrived 3 days early. I didn't know what to make of this development. Part of me wanted to believe they were genuinely changing, becoming self-sufficient adults capable of meeting their obligations. Another part, the part shaped by years of disappointment, suspected this was merely a temporary performance designed to manipulate me. The 5th month continued this positive trend. Not only did their payment arrive on time, but my mother sent an email that shocked me. Riley Mackenzie and I have been discussing our options, and we've decided it might be best to sell the house after all. It's too large for just the two of us, and the maintenance is becoming difficult to manage. Robert has offered to help us find something smaller and more affordable. I know our relationship has been strained, but I hope we can handle this transition amicably. Mom, I read the email several times, searching for the hidden catch, the subtle guilt trip, the veiled accusation. Finding none, I responded cautiously, that sounds like a sensible decision. I'm happy to cooperate with the sale process. Please let me know what you need from me. 2 days later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Mackenzie. Hey, she said awkwardly when I answered. I wanted to talk to you directly, instead of going through Mom or Robert. I waited, saying nothing. I've been seeing a new therapist, she continued into the silence. Someone Uncle Robert recommended, not the wellness retreat person. She's different, more focused on building independence than on validating feelings. That's good, I offered neutrally. Yeah, it is. She's helped me see some things more clearly. Mackenzie took a deep breath. Including how unfairly we treated you. I was so caught up in my own problems that I never acknowledged everything you were doing to keep us afloat. I'm sorry, Briley. I really am. The apology was so unexpected that I didn't immediately know how to respond. After years of being cast as the villain in my sister's narrative, hearing her take responsibility was disorienting. Thank you for saying that. I finally managed. I don't expect us to suddenly be best friends or anything, she added quickly. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to change. The job at the art store is going well. I'm even looking at taking some online classes in graphic design. We talked for another 10 minutes, the longest civil conversation we'd had in years. It was stilted and occasionally awkward, but it was a beginning. When we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, processing the shift in our family dynamic. By the 6th month, things had accelerated rapidly. A realtor had been engaged, the house was being prepared for sale, and my mother and sister had found a modest 2-bedroom apartment they could afford on their combined income. Uncle Robert had helped them create a budget that didn't rely on my contributions. The house sold surprisingly quickly, benefiting from a seller's market and its desirable suburban location. After the mortgage was paid off, the remaining equity was divided, according to our agreement, 40% to me, reflecting my documented contributions, and 60% split between my mother and Mackenzie. My portion came to just over $87,000. Not quite the full amount I had paid into the mortgage over the years, but enough to replenish my savings and make a substantial down payment on my own place when I was ready. The day of the closing, I met my mother and sister at the attorney's office. As we signed the final papers transferring ownership to a young family with 2 small children, I felt a complex mix of emotions. This house had been my childhood home, the setting for both happy memories and painful betrayals. Letting it go was bittersweet but necessary. After the closing, we stood awkwardly in the parking lot. My mother looked older than I remembered, the past 6 months having etched new lines around her eyes and mouth. I underestimated you, she said finally. You're more like your father than I realized, stubborn when it matters, but fair. Coming from her, it was high praise. We're having a small housewarming at the new apartment next weekend, Mackenzie added. Nothing fancy, just a few people. You'd be welcome to come. If you want to. The invitation was tentative, unsure, with no expectation or demand attached. For the first time in our adult relationship, Mackenzie was approaching me as an equal, not as either a caretaker or an adversary. I'll think about it, I said honestly. We parted with brief, slightly awkward hugs, not fully reconciled, but no longer actively at war. As I watched them drive away, I realized that the mortgage that had chained us together in dysfunction was finally paid in full, not just financially but emotionally. The house was sold, the debt was settled, and for the first time in years I felt truly free to build my own life on my own terms. Today, 2 years later, our relationship continues to evolve. We'll never be the picture-perfect family from holiday commercials, but we've found a new equilibrium based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Mackenzie completed her graphic design certification and now works freelance, creating logos and marketing materials for local businesses. My mother has retired from the library but continues her private cataloging work, which she genuinely enjoys. As for me, I used my portion of the house proceeds to purchase a small townhouse closer to the city. I've been promoted twice at work and recently started dating someone who values independence as much as I do. Most importantly, I've learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, not just for your own well-being, but sometimes for the growth of those who have become too accustomed to your sacrifices. The mortgage that once bound us in toxicity ultimately forced us to restructure our family on healthier terms. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable harmful patterns especially when those patterns are disguised as family loyalty. What about you? Have you ever experienced a family situation where karma came full circle, or where setting boundaries actually improved relationships in the long run? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this video resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and yes, sometimes the sweetest revenge that karma can deliver. Thank you so much for joining me today, and remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most necessary growth, both for ourselves and those we love. Until next time.